"Welcome to the team, Jamal. We expect great things from you." Mr. Collins' voice dripped with insincerity as he shook Jamal's hand with a forced smile. Jamal could feel the cold undertone beneath the polite words, but he shrugged it off. After all, this was a major step forward in his career, a chance to prove himself at one of the top tech firms in the country. But as the first few days passed, Jamal began to notice the subtle differences in how he was treated. A few offhand comments here, a little extra work there, and soon it became clear. He was being singled out. His white colleagues were friendly enough, but the boss's attitude toward him was different. It wasn't blatant at first, but Jamal had faced this before. The quiet kind of racism, the kind that's just under the surface, hidden in professional criticism and constructive feedback. "Jamal, could you stay late tonight to finish this report? It's crucial for the team's success," Mr. Collins asked with a patronizing smile, just before dismissing everyone else for the day. Jamal clenched his jaw. He had to play this smart. But little did Mr. Collins know, Jamal was not one to stay quiet for long. Jamal stared at the stack of papers on his desk, a task that would easily take another 3 hours to complete. The office was silent now, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft clicking of his keyboard. Everyone else had left hours ago, but here he was, alone, again. This had become a pattern. Each week it seemed like the workload piled higher and higher. Was this part of the job? He wondered. Jamal had been willing to put in the extra time to prove himself at first, but now it felt different. There was no end in sight, and Mr. Collins's dismissive attitude only confirmed his suspicions. The other employees, mostly white, would joke around during breaks, often getting pats on the back from Mr. Collins for their hard work, while he barely acknowledged Jamal's contributions. Despite outperforming his peers in every metric, Jamal was never invited to the after-work drinks or congratulated for his efforts. One day, while taking a moment to catch his breath, Jamal overheard 2 co-workers whispering near the break room. "Did you hear? Collins is grooming Ryan for the new team lead position. Guess he's already chosen his favorite." Jamal's heart sank. He had been working toward that promotion for months, and now it seemed like the decision had already been made without giving him a fair shot. Despite all his late nights, his dedication, and his effort, it didn't matter. "Is it because I'm black?" The thought echoed in his mind, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Not yet. Later that week, Jamal decided to stay after hours again. But this time, he didn't focus just on the report. He listened. Mr. Collins' office was across the hall, and the door was ajar. Jamal could hear him talking on the phone. At first, it was just background noise, but then something caught his attention. "Yeah, I just don't think Jamal's the right fit for leadership. He's got potential, sure, but I need someone who can really integrate with the team. You know what I mean? Someone we can trust to fit the culture here." Jamal's chest tightened. Fit the culture? What did that even mean? The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. He was being sidelined for something he had no control over. The unspoken rule in the office was clear. You don't fit the culture here unless you look like them. The next morning, Jamal sat at his desk, fuming but composed. He knew he couldn't let this slide, but he also knew he had to be strategic. Blowing up in anger would only give Mr. Collins the ammunition he needed to label him as difficult or emotional. No, if he was going to confront this situation, he had to be smarter about it. That night, after another long day of staying late, Jamal began researching employment laws and discrimination cases. He stumbled upon stories of other black professionals who had faced similar, if not identical, struggles. He read about how they had fought back, not through rage, but through meticulous planning, gathering evidence, and refusing to be silenced. As Jamal closed his laptop, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Mr. Collins get away with this. The office buzzed with its usual energy the next morning, but Jamal's focus had shifted. He had a new mission: gather evidence. He realized he couldn't simply accuse Mr. Collins without solid proof. Jamal had always been methodical in his work, and now he would apply that same discipline to protect his future. Throughout the week, Jamal kept his phone recorder on discreetly during meetings. He noted every subtle dig, every extra task thrown his way, and every instance where Mr. Collins ignored his achievements. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. One particular day stood out. Mr. Collins had scheduled a performance review meeting with Jamal, something that was routine for most employees. But as Jamal sat across from his boss, he quickly realized this wasn't going to be a typical review. "Jamal, you've been doing well, but I think there's still a lot of room for improvement," Mr. Collins said, his fingers steeple as he leaned back in his chair. "Improvement?" Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've consistently exceeded all the targets we set last quarter." "Yes, but it's not just about numbers, Jamal. It's about being a team player, fitting in with the rest of the group. You understand what I'm saying, right?" Mr. Collins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There it was again. Fitting in. Jamal clenched his fists under the table. It was becoming clearer by the day what that phrase really meant in Mr. Collins' world. The review ended with a vague note about continuing to develop, but nothing concrete about a promotion or any actual shortcomings. Just more reasons to keep Jamal on the outside. After the meeting, Jamal knew he needed to speed up his plan. He began combing through company emails and found something shocking, an internal email chain where Mr. Collins had referred to him as the diversity hire, suggesting that his real contribution to the company was for optics rather than actual value. Jamal stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. This is it. This is what I need. The tension between Jamal and Mr. Collins grew palpable. Jamal had all the proof he needed now, the emails, the recorded conversations, the consistent pattern of being pushed to the sidelines. He was done being the quiet, hard-working employee who went unnoticed while others were celebrated for doing less. It was a Friday evening, and just as Jamal was about to leave, Mr. Collins approached him with that same patronizing smile. "Jamal, I'm going to need you to stay late tonight again. There's a critical report that needs finishing, and I trust you'll get it done," he said, handing Jamal a thick folder of work. Jamal didn't take it this time. He stood up, the room suddenly feeling smaller as he stared Mr. Collins in the eye. "No." Mr. Collins blinked, clearly taken aback. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Jamal repeated, his voice steady. "I'm not staying late, and I'm not doing extra work because you think I need to prove myself more than anyone else." For a brief moment, there was silence. Then Mr. Collins' face twisted into an angry sneer. "You better be careful, Jamal. You don't want to make any rash decisions that could affect your future here." Jamal's pulse was pounding, but he didn't back down. He had waited long enough for this moment. "I'm well aware of what's going on, Mr. Collins, and so will everyone else soon." With that, Jamal turned and walked out, leaving his boss standing there, speechless. Jamal left the office that evening feeling both elated and anxious. He had finally stood up for himself, but he knew that this was just the beginning. What came next would be the real challenge. As he drove home, his mind raced with thoughts about how to proceed. He had gathered evidence, but now it was time to put that evidence to use. That night, Jamal reached out to someone he knew could help. Angela, a senior executive in the same industry and one of the few black leaders he respected deeply. Angela had faced her own share of struggles rising through the corporate ranks, and her advice had always been practical and grounded in experience. "Angela, I need your help," Jamal said when she picked up the phone. "I'm dealing with a situation at work, and I think it's time to take action. It's about racism, discrimination, and I have evidence to back it up." Angela's voice was calm but firm. "Jamal, I've been in your shoes. It's not easy, and it's not fair, but you have to be strategic about how you handle this. You can't just go in guns blazing. The key here is leverage. Do you have enough to make them take you seriously?" Jamal told her about the emails, the recorded conversations, and the overall atmosphere of discrimination. Angela listened intently before speaking. "You've done the right thing by collecting evidence, but now you need to decide what your end goal is. Do you want to stay and fight for change within the company, or do you want to leave on your own terms? Either way, you'll need to present your case in a way that makes them realize they can't just sweep this under the rug. Jamal hadn't thought much about the long term yet. Did he want to stay at a company where he'd been treated like this, or would it be better to use this as a stepping stone to something greater? I'm not sure yet, he admitted. But I do know that I can't let Mr. Collins get away with this. Angela's tone softened. Then we'll work on a plan together. Don't rush into anything. Take a few days to breathe, and then we'll talk strategy. By Monday morning, Jamal had steeled himself for what was to come. He walked into the office with a quiet determination, knowing that he was about to confront Mr. Collins once and for all. It was time to take control of the situation. After a morning meeting, Jamal knocked on Mr. Collins' office door. The boss glanced up from his desk, clearly surprised to see Jamal standing there. "Jamal, come in," Mr. Collins said, his tone friendly but cautious. Jamal stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about the way you've been treating me." Mr. Collins's smile faltered for a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jamal. I've been nothing but fair to you." Jamal didn't back down. "You've been singling me out for extra work, denying me opportunities, and undermining my contributions. I have proof of everything, and I'm not going to stay silent any longer." Mr. Collins's face hardened. "Be careful, Jamal. Accusations like this can backfire. If you're implying discrimination, that's a very serious claim. You should think long and hard before making such a move." Jamal stood his ground, feeling the weight of the moment. "I don't need to think long and hard. I've already made up my mind. You've been treating me differently because of my race, and I have the emails and recordings to prove it." Mr. Collins's eyes widened for a split second before he quickly regained his composure. "I don't know what you think you have, but this conversation is over. You're out of line, Jamal." Jamal knew that this was Mr. Collins' way of trying to scare him into backing down, but he wouldn't be intimidated. "This conversation is just beginning," Jamal said calmly. "I'll be taking this up with HR and higher management. You can try to deny it all you want, but the truth will come out." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Mr. Collins seething behind his desk. With the confrontation behind him, Jamal felt a sense of relief, but he knew there was still much work to be done. He needed to ensure that when he brought this to HR and upper management, his case would be airtight. Over the next few weeks, Jamal worked diligently to organize all of his evidence: emails, recordings, performance reports, and testimonies from trusted colleagues. He had already secured support from a few co-workers who had noticed the unfair treatment but had been too afraid to speak up. Now that Jamal had taken the first step, they were willing to back him up. One evening, while reviewing his notes, Jamal found the final piece of evidence that solidified his case. It was an internal memo from Mr. Collins to another department head, discussing the need to reevaluate Jamal's position in the company. The language in the memo was coded but clear enough for anyone paying attention. Mr. Collins was actively trying to sabotage Jamal's career. Jamal stared at the memo, feeling a mixture of anger and vindication. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. With this, there would be no denying the truth. As word began to spread about Jamal's upcoming HR complaint, the office atmosphere shifted. Some colleagues avoided him, either out of fear of getting involved or out of loyalty to Mr. Collins. Others, however, began to quietly express their support. One afternoon, Jamal was approached by Sarah, a white colleague who had been friendly but distant until now. "Jamal, I just wanted to say I admire what you're doing," Sarah said, glancing around nervously. "I've seen what's been happening, and it's wrong. If you need someone to back you up, I'm here." Jamal was taken aback by her offer. He had assumed that most of his co-workers would stay neutral or side with Mr. Collins, but it seemed that more people were on his side than he realized. "Thank you, Sarah," Jamal said sincerely. "I appreciate it. I might need your help when the time comes." Not everyone was as supportive, though. Mr. Collins still had his loyalists, and they made it clear that they were standing by their boss. Jamal overheard whispers of people calling him a troublemaker, accusing him of playing the race card to get ahead. It stung, but he reminded himself why he was doing this. It wasn't just for him, it was for everyone who had ever been mistreated or silenced. The day of the HR meeting finally arrived. Jamal had spent hours preparing, going over every detail with Angela's guidance. He knew this was the moment that would determine the course of his career. He walked into the conference room with his head held high. Mr. Collins was already seated, flanked by the HR director and a senior executive. Jamal could feel the tension in the room, but he refused to let it shake him. The HR director, Ems Lawson, began the meeting by outlining the process. Jamal, we understand that you have concerns about your treatment in the workplace. We're here to listen and to ensure that all employees are treated fairly. Jamal nodded and began presenting his case. He laid out the timeline of events, the evidence he had gathered, and the consistent pattern of discrimination he had experienced. As he spoke, he could see Mr. Collins shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his usual smug demeanor replaced by unease. When Jamal finished, Ms. Lawson turned to Mr. Collins. "Mr. Collins, do you have a response to these allegations?" Mr. Collins cleared his throat. "These accusations are completely baseless. Jamal has been given the same opportunities as everyone else. If he feels otherwise, I'm sorry, but I've always treated him fairly." Jamal didn't flinch. "I have emails, recordings, and witnesses that say otherwise." Ms. Lawson looked at the stack of documents Jamal had brought with him. She seemed genuinely concerned. "We will review everything carefully, Jamal. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll conduct a thorough investigation." As the meeting concluded, Jamal knew that the tide was starting to turn. He had made his move, and now it was up to the company to decide how they would respond. The HR investigation was supposed to take weeks, but it stretched into months. Jamal continued to show up for work, but every day felt like a battle. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and the tension in the office was palpable. Even though Mr. Collins was still officially in charge, his influence seemed to be waning. People were beginning to see through his facade. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. Jamal was called into an all-hands meeting. It was unusual for the entire company to be gathered like this, especially on short notice. As he walked into the conference room, he saw Mr. Collins standing at the front, flanked by the senior executives and Ms. Lawson from HR. There was an uneasy energy in the room. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Collins began, his voice tight with forced professionalism. "There have been some recent concerns raised about fairness and equity in the workplace, and we wanted to address them openly." Jamal's heart raced. He hadn't expected this to happen in such a public forum. "It's important that we maintain a culture of trust and respect in this company," Mr. Collins continued. "Any accusations of discrimination are taken very seriously. However, I want to assure you all that these concerns are unfounded, and we will continue to strive for the highest standards of professionalism." Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mr. Collins was trying to spin the narrative to make it seem like the investigation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Before Jamal could stop himself, he stood up. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. "That's not true," Jamal said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The accusations are not unfounded. I've been treated unfairly for months, and I have the evidence to prove it." There was a murmur of shock throughout the room. Mr. Collins's face turned pale as he realized what was happening. "Jamal," he said through gritted teeth, "this is not the time or place for this." But Jamal wasn't backing down. "This is exactly the time and place. Everyone in this room deserves to know the truth. You've been discriminating against me because of my race, and I'm not going to stay quiet anymore." He pulled out his phone and connected it to the projector in the room. Within seconds, the entire company was seeing the emails he had gathered, the ones where Mr. Collins referred to Jamal as a diversity hire and plotted to sabotage his promotion. He played recordings of their conversations where Mr. Collins had subtly but unmistakably undermined him. The room was dead silent as the evidence played out on the screen. When the last recording finished, Jamal turned to face Mr. Collins. You told me I didn't fit the culture. Well, maybe the culture here needs to change. Mr. Collins stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to form a response, but no words came. He was cornered, and there was no escape. The aftermath of the meeting was swift and brutal. Within hours, Mr. Collins was placed on immediate suspension pending the conclusion of the HR investigation. His office was cleared out, and rumors swirled that he was negotiating a quiet exit from the company to avoid further scandal. But it wasn't just about Mr. Collins anymore. Jamal's public stand had opened the floodgates. Other employees began to come forward with their own stories, about not just Mr. Collins, but other leaders in the company who had contributed to a toxic work environment. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. The company had a systemic problem, and now it was all coming to light. The company's CEO, Mr. Harris, called Jamal into his office for a private meeting. As Jamal walked into the sleek, glass-walled office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had fought back, and now the entire organization was being forced to confront its failures. "Jamal, I want to start by saying thank you," Mr. Harris said, his tone sincere. "I know it took immense courage to stand up like you did. We've already begun making changes, and your actions have been a catalyst for that. We can't undo what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again." Jamal nodded, appreciating the words, but he still had a lot to process. "I just want fairness, Mr. Harris, for myself and for everyone who's been treated like I have." "We're working on that," Mr. Harris assured him. "I'd like to offer you a promotion to team lead, effective immediately. You've more than earned it." Jamal hesitated. The promotion was tempting, but after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay at the company. He had seen the dark side of the corporate world, and while he had won this battle, the scars it left behind were still fresh. "I appreciate the offer," Jamal said slowly, "but I need some time to think about it. I've got other plans in mind." As Mr. Collins's departure became official, Jamal was approached by legal counsel about filing a formal lawsuit for racial discrimination. It wasn't just about money. It was about making a statement, about ensuring that what happened to him didn't happen to anyone else. After consulting with Angela and his lawyer, Jamal decided to move forward with the lawsuit. It was a bold move and one that would put him under public scrutiny, but he was ready for it. He had come too far to back down now. The lawsuit was filed, and as news spread, it attracted the attention of the media. Jamal's story became a headline, another high-profile case of racial discrimination in corporate America. News outlets contacted him for interviews, and suddenly, he found himself at the center of a much larger conversation about racism in the workplace. Jamal's legal team was confident. They had a mountain of evidence, and they knew the company would want to settle out of court to avoid further embarrassment. But Jamal wasn't just looking for a payday. He wanted the company to commit to real, lasting changes. "We can offer a settlement," the company's lawyers said during negotiations. "A substantial one, but we'd like to avoid a trial for both your sake and the company's." Jamal considered it. The money would be enough to set him up for life, but deep down he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every black professional who had been marginalized, every person who had been told they didn't fit the culture. "I'm not just looking for a settlement," Jamal said firmly. "I want real changes. I want diversity training, new hiring practices, and accountability at all levels of leadership. If the company is willing to commit to that, then we can talk." The negotiations continued for weeks, but eventually the company agreed to a series of reforms. They would implement new policies, hold mandatory training on racial equity, and conduct regular audits to ensure that discrimination had no place in their organization. As news of the settlement and the company's reforms broke, Jamal's story gained even more attention. He was interviewed on national television, his face becoming a symbol of the fight for racial justice in the workplace. People from all over the country reached out to him, sharing their own stories of discrimination and thanking him for his bravery. But with the attention came challenges. Some people accused him of being a troublemaker, of playing the victim card to gain fame and fortune. Jamal knew these criticisms would come, but he didn't let them deter him. He had done what was right, and that was all that mattered. One day, while scrolling through his messages, Jamal received an email that caught his attention. It was from a prestigious tech company, one even larger than the one he had worked for. Jamal, we've been following your story closely. We're impressed with your leadership and your dedication to fairness and equity. We'd love to discuss an opportunity for you to join our team in a senior leadership role. Let's talk. Jamal smiled. This was just the beginning. While the settlement with the company had brought some closure, Mr. Collins wasn't out of the picture just yet. The legal battle with him personally had escalated to a trial. Mr. Collins had refused to admit any wrongdoing and had tried to smear Jamal's reputation in the process. The courtroom was tense as both sides presented their cases. Jamal's lawyer was sharp, meticulously laying out the evidence against Mr. Collins, including the emails and recordings that had already brought him down at work. Mr. Collins's defense was weak. He claimed that any decisions he had made were based on performance, not race. But the jury wasn't buying it. After days of testimony and deliberation, the verdict came in. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mr. Collins, guilty of racial discrimination. Jamal sat in silence as the verdict was read. He had won. Justice had been served, and Mr. Collins would be held accountable. The aftermath of the trial brought Jamal both relief and a sense of closure. Mr. Collins was ordered to pay damages, and the court ruling sent a powerful message. Racism in the workplace would not be tolerated. The company, now under new leadership and with a renewed focus on diversity and inclusion, offered Jamal the promotion he had been denied for so long. But after everything that had happened, Jamal knew it was time to move on. Jamal decided to leave the company and start his own consulting firm, specializing in helping other Black professionals navigate the corporate world. He knew that his experience, while painful, had given him the tools to help others. His firm quickly gained attention, and soon he was working with some of the top companies in the country, advising them on diversity and inclusion strategies. One day, as Jamal sat in his new office, he received a call from an old colleague. "Jamal, you did it. You made a difference." Jamal smiled. "Yeah, I guess I did." He had fought back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, and now he was helping others do the same. As the months passed, Jamal continued to reflect on his journey. The battle with Mr. Collins and the company had been exhausting, but it had also been transformative. He had grown not just as a professional, but as a person. He mentored young professionals, sharing his story and encouraging them to stand up for themselves. He spoke at conferences and schools, spreading a message of empowerment and resilience. And through it all, he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the long nights of staying late at work, the whispers in the office, or the moment when he decided to fight back. Those memories fueled him, pushed him to keep going, to keep fighting for what was right. The world wasn't perfect, but it was changing, and Jamal knew that he had played a part in that change. Jamal's story is one of courage, resilience, and justice. He stood up to a racist boss, exposed the truth, and sparked a movement for change. His epic response left not just Mr. Collins, but an entire company, speechless. As the story comes to a close, Jamal's journey serves as an inspiration to everyone who has ever faced discrimination. His message is clear. Never be afraid to stand up for yourself, because when you do, you can change the world. If you found Jamal's story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave a comment below about your own experiences and how you've stood up for what's right. Together, we can make a difference.